The first thing I remember from that morning was the cold. Not the kind of cold you complain about when you forget your gloves or when your car heater takes too long to warm up. No, this was the kind of cold that cut through your skin and sank deep into your bones. I was standing outside on the porch of my sister's house, shivering in nothing but a thin sweater, with a half-packed duffel bag at my feet. My breath hung in the air, pale clouds vanishing into the grey December sky. And then I heard her voice, "You're not welcome here anymore. Get out." Those were the words my sister spat at me, sharp as icicles, final as a slammed door. For a second, I just stood there, blinking at her. I thought maybe she was bluffing, maybe she was just angry and would take it back. But then I saw the look in her eyes. There was no warmth, no hesitation, just annoyance, like I was a problem she couldn't wait to get rid of. "You heard me," she said again, folding her arms across her chest. "Take your stuff and leave now." The doorframe behind her still glowed with the soft yellow light of her living room. I could smell the faint aroma of coffee drifting out, the kind of comfort that stings even more when you're denied it. Behind her, the house looked warm, cozy, safe, and she was shoving me out into the freezing morning without so much as a jacket. I opened my mouth to protest, but my voice cracked before words could even form. Why? I didn't do anything. She rolled her eyes. "You're pathetic, you know that. Always mooching, always playing the victim. I've had enough. Go cry somewhere else. I don't want you here." The words landed heavier than the snowflakes beginning to fall around me. My own sister. The same girl I'd shared a bedroom with growing up, the same one I used to defend from bullies at school, the one I once thought was my closest friend, looking at me now as though I was nothing but trash left on her doorstep. I tried again, my voice trembling. "But I don't have anywhere to go. At least let me stay until I find." Her hand shot up, silencing me. "No, not another word. You made your choices, and I'm done cleaning up after you. You think the world owes you something just because you've had a tough life. Newsflash, it doesn't, and neither do I." She leaned against the doorframe, her lips curling into a smirk. "You're weak. Always have been. That's why nobody respects you. That's why Mom and Dad don't bother calling you anymore. That's why you'll never be more than a burden." I'm done. I could feel my eyes burning, the sting of tears mixing with the bite of the winter air. But behind that pain, something else stirred. Something quieter, heavier. A seed of anger, because she was wrong. I wasn't weak. At least, not in the way she thought. I bent down slowly, my fingers stiff from the cold as I grabbed the handle of my duffel bag. The zipper was half open, revealing the messy pile of clothes I had shoved inside in a panic when she started yelling at me earlier. But tucked carefully between the folds of fabric was something she couldn't see, a red folder, plain, ordinary, but more powerful than she could ever imagine. I straightened up, clutching the bag tightly, and forced myself to meet her eyes. "If that's how you feel," I whispered, my breath shaky but my voice steady enough, "then fine. I'll go." For a split second, I thought I saw surprise flash across her face. Maybe she expected me to beg. Maybe she wanted me to fall to my knees, to plead for her mercy. But I didn't give her the satisfaction. I turned, dragging the bag behind me as I stepped off her porch into the snow. The powder crunched under my thin sneakers, instantly soaking through the fabric. My toes went numb almost immediately. I didn't look back. Behind me, I heard the slam of the door. Then silence. It was just me now. Me, the cold, and the endless white street stretching before me like a punishment. I walked for what felt like hours. My hands were raw, my body shaking so violently I could barely keep my footing. The world blurred around me, the houses on either side fading into grey shadows behind the curtain of snowfall. But even as the storm swallowed me whole, I couldn't stop thinking about her words. Pathetic, weak, a burden. It wasn't the first time I'd heard them. Not from her, not from my parents, not from the so-called friends who had disappeared when my life fell apart. For years, I had been the family scapegoat, the one who could never measure up, the one they blamed when things went wrong, the one who was always just less successful, less loved, less important. And my sister, she was the opposite, the golden child, the one who could do no wrong, even when she lied, even when she cheated, even when she hurt me in ways I still carried like scars. They always forgave her. They always celebrated her. They always chose her. Or maybe this morning shouldn't have surprised me. Maybe being kicked out into the snow was just the natural next step. But what none of them knew, what none of them could know, was that I wasn't empty-handed this time. That red folder in my bag, it held the truth. And truth has a way of melting through even the coldest winters. By the time I reached the bus stop at the end of the street, my fingers were so numb I could barely pull the strap of my bag tighter over my shoulder. I sank onto the icy bench, shivering, my breath ragged. The street was empty, silent except for the distant hum of wind. I pulled the bag into my lap, unzipped it just enough to peek inside. There it was, the folder. The red stood out against the grey fabric like a drop of blood on snow. I rested my hand on it, letting the plastic cover warm slightly beneath my palm. And for the first time since my sister slammed the door in my face, I smiled, because I knew something she didn't. She thought she had won. She thought she had broken me. She thought I was gone for good, another forgotten failure. But this wasn't the end. Not even close. This was the beginning, and when the time was right, I would make sure she remembered this day forever. The day she kicked me out into the cold. The day she thought she'd silenced me. The day she set the stage for her own downfall, because the red folder was going to change everything. When you've been branded the failure of the family, you get used to carrying invisible weights. They don't hand you those labels outright, not in so many words. No one sits you down and says, "Hey, you're the disappointment, and your sister is the pride of our family." No, it's more subtle, more poisonous. It shows up in the way your father's face lights up when she walks into a room but barely flickers when you enter. It's in the way your mother introduces her as my accomplished daughter at parties, while you're simply the other one. It's in the sighs, the raised eyebrows, the unspoken comparison that follows you like a shadow. And growing up, I wore that shadow like a second skin. My sister, Lila, was born 3 years before me, and from the moment she could talk, the world seemed to orbit around her. She had that kind of smile that made people lean closer, that kind of confidence that turned even her mistakes into charming stories. I was quieter, softer, always on the edges, always watching. When we were kids, if Lila painted a messy stick figure, my parents would pin it proudly on the fridge, calling it a masterpiece. When I came home with an actual art competition ribbon, they nodded politely before returning to their conversation about Lila's potential. If she got a B in math, they'd say, "Oh well, she's more creative anyway." If I got an A, the response was, "Good. That's what you're supposed to do." Do you know what it feels like when your best effort is treated as the bare minimum? while someone else's bare minimum is celebrated as brilliance. It hollows you out. It makes you question whether anything you do even matters. By the time we were teenagers, the gap between us had widened into a canyon. Lila was the golden girl of our high school, head cheerleader, prom queen, dating the football captain. She sparkled, she thrived, she lived in the spotlight, and me, I was the girl people barely noticed. The one scribbling in notebooks during lunch, the one working part-time jobs to save for college, because I knew nobody else would help. It wasn't that I didn't have dreams. I did. But every time I tried to reach for them, someone reminded me where I stood. You'll never be like your sister, Mom would say, not cruelly, just matter of fact, like it was a universal truth. She's destined for bigger things. You, well, maybe you'll find something small that makes you happy. Small. That word burned, but the cruelest part, it wasn't just my parents who treated her like the sun, and me like a shadow. Lila herself did it too. She learned early that she could get away with anything if she tilted her head and smiled sweetly enough. And she used it ruthlessly. I remember the first time she stole something from me. It wasn't money or clothes, or even a prized possession. It was a boy. I was 16, awkward and shy, but I had finally worked up the courage to talk to a boy from my art class who made me laugh. We had been texting, meeting at the library, and I thought just maybe that I had something of my own, until one Friday night, when I walked into the school gym to see him with his arms around Lila. She caught my eye, smirked, and whispered something into his ear that made him laugh. He didn't even look guilty, because why would he? She was Lila and me. I was just the sister she could take from, without consequence. That was only the beginning. She stole more than just a boy. She stole opportunities. She stole trust. She stole the one internship I had worked months to land, after convincing my parents to pull some strings so she could take it instead. I tried to fight back. I did. But every time I confronted her, the story somehow flipped. She's jealous. She'd whine to Mom and Dad, crocodile tears shimmering in her eyes. She's always trying to ruin things for me, and they believed her. Always. I became the villain in my own home. The difficult child. The bitter one. The failure. You might be wondering why I even ended up at her house years later, standing in her doorway on that brutal winter morning, begging for shelter. The answer is simple. Family loyalty is a chain, and even when it chokes you, part of you still believes it's worth holding on to. I was in a rough place. My job had ended abruptly when the company downsized, and my savings were thin. My parents, well, they weren't an option. They'd long since written me off. And despite everything, when Lila offered to let me stay with her for a while, I thought maybe, just maybe she had changed. Maybe adulthood had softened her edges. Maybe she finally saw me as more than just a shadow trailing behind her spotlight. But I should have known better, because people like Lila don't change. They just get better at hiding their cruelty until the perfect moment to unleash it. There I was, shivering in the snow with my life stuffed into a duffel bag, listening to the echoes of her insults, pathetic, weak, a burden, and yet she was blind to the one thing that had kept me from breaking entirely, the red folder. That folder wasn't just a stack of papers. It was years of quiet observation, of connecting dots, of gathering proof. Proof that the golden girl wasn't so golden after all. Inside that folder were contracts, bank records, emails, things I had collected carefully, almost accidentally at first, when I stumbled across her lies. Things that painted a very different picture of my sister and, eventually, of my parents too. I hadn't meant for it to grow into something so big. At first, I just saved one or two things, thinking maybe one day I'd need them. But over the years, as the betrayals piled up, so did the evidence, and by the time I left her house that morning, that folder was the only warmth I had, because while the cold gnawed at my skin, the thought of what was inside kept a fire alive in my chest. People think revenge is about rage, about lashing out, about wanting to hurt someone as badly as they hurt you, but real revenge, it's quieter, it's patient, it's carrying a folder full of truths while everyone else underestimates you. It's waiting for the perfect moment to turn their own shadows into their downfall. And I knew deep in my frostbitten bones that my moment was coming, because my sister had spent her whole life convincing the world that she was perfect. And all it would take was opening that red folder to shatter the illusion forever. The snow didn't care about my story. It didn't care that my sister had just slammed the door on me, or that my parents had abandoned me years before. The snow was indifferent. It fell steadily, silently, blanketing the world in white as if to erase me altogether. My sneakers were soaked through, my socks freezing against my skin. Every step felt heavier, like I was dragging not just my duffel bag but the entire weight of my life behind me. I told myself, one more step, just one more. But the truth was I didn't know where I was going. I had $20 in my pocket, a phone with 14% battery, and the red folder in my bag. That was it. I found a cheap hostel downtown, the kind of place where the walls smelled faintly of mold and the sheets were thin as paper. The receptionist barely glanced at me as I slid the wrinkled bills across the counter. 2 nights, I whispered, my voice so small I hardly recognized it. She handed me a key without a word. The room was cold, drafty, the window cracked where someone had once slammed it shut too hard. But to me, it was shelter. I collapsed onto the thin mattress, my duffel bag clutched to my chest like it was a lifeline. And in a way, it was, because inside that bag was the red folder. And inside the red folder was the only reason I hadn't completely broken. That first night, I didn't sleep much. My stomach growled. I hadn't eaten all day, but the hunger was nothing compared to the storm inside my mind. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Lila's face. The smug curve of her smile, the cold glint in her eyes as she pushed me out. And behind her, the warm glow of the life I wasn't allowed to have. Her words replayed over and over, like a cruel lullaby. You're weak. You're pathetic. Nobody respects you. For years, I had believed them. I had worn those words like a brand, letting them dictate who I was allowed to become. But lying there on that lumpy mattress, clutching the folder to my chest, something inside me began to shift. Because if I was really weak, then why was I still standing? If I was pathetic, then why was I still fighting to survive? If I was nothing, then why was I the one holding the truth that could unravel everything she had built? The thought sparked a fire, small at first, flickering, fragile, but it was there. For the first time in years, I let myself imagine a future where I wasn't just surviving but winning. The next morning, I walked to a nearby CAF, lured in by the promise of warmth. I couldn't afford a meal, so I bought the cheapest thing on the menu, a plain cup of coffee. I sat by the window, nursing it slowly, letting the heat seep into my frozen fingers. Outside, the world moved on without me, people hurrying to work, bundled up in coats and scarves, faces buried in phones. Nobody knew me. Nobody cared. And oddly, there was a freedom in that. For once, I wasn't Lila's little sister. I wasn't the family disappointment. I was just a woman in a CAF with a duffel bag and a secret. I opened the folder on my lap, careful to shield it from curious eyes. Page after page stared back at me. Bank statements, emails, signed contracts with dates that didn't match up, a copy of a will that had mysteriously gone missing after my grandmother died. Each piece of paper was a puzzle piece. Alone, they might not mean much, but together, they told a story of lies, of theft, of betrayal that went deeper than I had ever realized. And at the center of it all, Lila, the golden child, the shining star, the fraud. I traced my finger along the edge of the folder, a strange calm settling over me. For years, I had been the silent one, the forgotten one, the overlooked one. But silence has a way of turning into observation. And observation turns into knowledge, and knowledge is power. The days that followed were hard, brutally hard. I stretched those 2 nights at the hostel into a week by cleaning rooms in exchange for a place to sleep. I lived on instant noodles and day-old pastries the CAF threw out. My clothes smelled like mildew. My shoes barely held together. But every night, when I returned to that tiny room, I opened the folder and reminded myself, this isn't forever. I read through the documents until I could recite them from memory. I underlined dates, circled names, made lists of connections. I didn't have the money for a lawyer yet, but I knew someday I would. And when I did, the truth would come out. It was during one of those nights, sitting cross-legged on the floor, with papers spread around me, that the realization hit. This wasn't just about Lila. It wasn't just about her lies or her cruelty. It was about my parents too. About the way they had enabled her, protected her, chosen her over me again and again. The will I had found a copy tucked away in an old desk drawer at our childhood home made it clear. My grandmother had intended to split her estate evenly between us, but the version my parents showed me later had only one name on it, Lila's. My name had been erased, literally, and suddenly, everything made sense. The sudden financial boost that allowed Lila to buy her house. The way my parents kept telling me there was nothing left to help me with college. The smug way she flaunted her lifestyle, while I was left scrambling to survive. It wasn't just favoritism, it was theft, and I wasn't going to let it go. You know what they say about hitting rock bottom. It's true, you either break or you build. And as I sat there in that shabby room, the storm of my life still raging outside, I made a choice. I wasn't going to beg for scraps of love anymore. I wasn't going to let them define me as weak, pathetic, worthless. No, I was going to build myself back up, brick by brick, until I was strong enough to face them. And when that day came, I wouldn't need their approval. I wouldn't need their love. All I would need was the red folder, because it wasn't just paper. It was proof. Proof that the golden child was a fraud. Proof that the perfect family was rotten at its core. Proof that I was never the weak one, only the one who saw too much. And when the time was right, I would reveal it. Not quietly, not in secret, but in front of everyone. So that the people who had mocked me, ignored me, and cast me aside would have no choice but to freeze. Just like I froze on that winter morning when my sister kicked me out. Memory is a strange thing. It doesn't always come in order. It doesn't always come when you want it to. But when you're sitting alone in a drafty room, clutching a red folder like it's the only thing keeping you alive, The past has a way of finding you, and in those long nights, when hunger gnawed at my stomach and the wind rattled the broken window, the memories came back one by one, each sharper than the last, each a reminder of why I could never forgive. The first memory that hit me was the day my grandmother died. She was the only person who ever made me feel seen. She used to cup my face in her soft hands, kiss my forehead, and whisper, "Don't let them make you small." When she passed, I was 19. I remember sitting in her living room with the rest of my family, numb from crying, when the talk of her will came up. My parents pulled me aside later, their tone matter of fact. "Sweetheart," my mother said, her hand resting on my arm with mock sympathy, "you know your grandmother adored you. But she wanted to make sure Lila was taken care of. You understand, right?" There wasn't much left to split. I remember nodding, even though my throat burned with questions I didn't dare ask. Because of course I understood. I had been trained to understand my whole life. But weeks later, while cleaning out her desk, I stumbled across an old draft of that will. And there it was in my grandmother's careful handwriting, an even split. Half for me, half for Lila. That draft went into the red folder. It was the first page, and the first time I realized that my family wasn't just cruel. They were thieves. The second memory that returned was from college, or rather, the college years I was supposed to have. I had worked so hard in high school, late nights, part-time jobs, scholarships applications, and somehow, against all odds, I got accepted into a good university. Not Ivy League, but solid. A place where I thought maybe, just maybe, I could finally build something of my own. But when I told my parents, their faces didn't light up. Instead, my father frowned. "Out-of-state tuition. That's too expensive. We can't afford that." My mother chimed in, her voice sharp with disapproval. "Why would you want to waste money on art classes? Be realistic. You'll just end up broke." I begged. I promised. To work, to apply for aid, to take on loans. But they were unmoved. And then, 3 months later, Layla announced she'd been accepted into a private school. A school with even higher tuition. A school my parents suddenly could afford. They paid her fees without blinking. They bought her new furniture for her dorm. They bragged to their friends about how our daughter is thriving at such a prestigious place. And me, I stayed home. I worked nights at a diner. I saved what little I could, watching from the sidelines as my sister's world expanded and mine shrank. Years later, while digging through family papers, I found the account statement showing my grandmother's estate had been liquidated around the same time. The same estate I had supposedly been left out of. It wasn't that my parents couldn't afford my tuition. It was that they chose not to. That statement went into the folder too. The third memory was harder to swallow because it wasn't about money. It was about love. I met Daniel when I was 24. He wasn't perfect, but he was kind. He listened to me, laughed at my bad jokes, held my hand when I felt invisible. For the first time in years, I thought someone had chosen me, but Lila couldn't stand that. At first, she played the doting sister, teasing me, asking about him, pretending to be happy for me. But I should have known, because one night, after a fight with Daniel over something small, I drove to his apartment to apologize. And there she was, her coat on his chair, her lipstick on his glass, her perfume in the air. When I confronted her, she smiled, actually smiled, and said, "You should thank me. He was going to leave you anyway." I just sped things up. That smile still haunts me. It wasn't about Daniel. She didn't even stay with him long. It was about me. About proving, once again, that nothing in my life was safe from her reach. I didn't put anything from that betrayal into the folder. There was no paper trail, no evidence, just the scar. But sometimes scars are evidence enough. The fourth memory was the one that made me clutch the folder tighter every night. It happened just a year before she kicked me out. I had finally found a decent job, a small office role, nothing glamorous, but steady. For once, I felt like I was gaining ground. Then one afternoon, I overheard my boss on the phone saying Lila's name. My stomach dropped. Later, I learned she had gone behind my back, cozying up to the company owner, who happened to be a family friend, telling him I was unstable, unreliable, unfit for the role. She painted me as a liability until they quietly pushed me out, and then, almost mockingly, she swooped in and helped the company with a side project, earning praise for her initiative. I wanted to scream, to fight, to tell them the truth, but I didn't. Instead, I saved the emails I managed to find, where she had slandered me under the guise of concern. I printed them out, highlighted her words, and into the folder they went. By the time I finished reliving these memories, I was trembling, not from the cold this time, but from fury, because looking at them all together, the picture was painfully clear. This wasn't a few isolated betrayals. This was a lifetime, a pattern, a deliberate effort to erase me, to keep me small, to make sure I never had anything of my own, and my parents had been part of it every step of the way. I used to think, maybe they just didn't notice, maybe they were blinded by her charm. But no, those bank statements, that will, those choices, they weren't accidents. They had chosen her, over and over again, and in doing so, they had chosen to abandon me. I sat back against the wall, the folder spread open before me, the papers fluttering in the draft. For years, I had been told I was weak. But looking at the evidence in front of me, I realized something else. I wasn't weak. I was the only one strong enough to face the truth. Lila lived in illusions, propped up by lies. My parents lived in denial, protecting their golden child. But me, I lived in reality. And reality was my weapon. I pressed my palm flat against the folder, whispering to myself, one day they'll see. And when that day came, it wouldn't just be my family who saw. It would be everyone. Because secrets lose their power when they're dragged into the light. And I was ready, finally ready to hold the light. There's a difference between surviving and living. For weeks after Lila shoved me out into the snow, I was surviving. Scraping by, sleeping in cold hostels, eating whatever I could afford. Every day blurred into the next, and my world was as gray as the sky outside. But somewhere between the crumbling walls of that hostel and the CAF where I nursed cold coffee, something changed. I stopped asking myself, why did this happen to me? And I started asking, what am I going to do about it? At first, my plan wasn't grand. It was simple. Get steady work, save money, find stability. I took whatever job I could get, answering phones in a dusty office that smelled like stale paper, mopping floors in the evenings at a grocery store, folding clothes in a boutique where the customers looked at me like I was invisible. It was humiliating sometimes, yes, but it was also humbling in a way that made me sharper. Each paycheck, no matter how small, was a step away from being powerless. I kept a notebook, cheap, spiral-bound, with a blue cover. In it, I wrote 2 things every day. how much money I had saved. A piece of my plan. At first, the plan was vague. Find a lawyer, research inheritance fraud, look into whistleblower cases. But as the weeks stretched into months, the notes became clearer, sharper. I was no longer just surviving. I was sketching out a blueprint for revenge. People think revenge happened in an instant, a dramatic confrontation, a shouted accusation, a single devastating reveal. But real revenge, it's patient, it's methodical, it's built one careful step at a time. I started by organizing the red folder. It wasn't just a stack of papers anymore, it had grown into a record. I bought dividers, labels, plastic sleeves. I separated sections: inheritance, financials, career sabotage, personal betrayals. Every time I opened it, it felt less like a pile of pain and more like a weapon forged out of years of cruelty. And the more I worked on it, the more I realized something important. This wasn't just about hurting Lila. This was about reclaiming myself. For too long, I had been the silent one, the forgotten one, the one shoved aside. But with each page I organized, each note I wrote, I was building something bigger than revenge. I was building proof that I mattered, that my story mattered, that the truth mattered. Of course, none of this came without doubt. There were nights when exhaustion sank its claws into me and I wondered if I was fooling myself. If maybe I should just give up, accept my place in the shadows, stop fighting battles I couldn't win. But then I'd open the folder, trace the sharp ink of my sister's lies, and the doubt would evaporate. Because it wasn't just about me anymore. It was about my grandmother, who trusted them to honor her wishes. It was about the years of work I put in, only to be erased. It was about the girl I used to be, the one who cried quietly in her room, believing she wasn't worth defending. I owed it to all of them to fight. Slowly, I started to test the waters. I went to the library and read everything I could about inheritance disputes. I researched cases where siblings fought over wills, where fraud was exposed, where truth shattered reputations. I spoke quietly to a paralegal I met at a community event, asking vague questions. She didn't know the details, but she gave me advice. Documentation is everything. Keep records. Paper trails don't lie. That night, I slept with the folder beside me, like it was a child I was protecting, because that's what it was. In a way, the child of all my pain, all my endurance, all my silence. And I was raising it into something powerful. Months passed. The seasons shifted. The bitter cold of winter gave way to the muddy thaw of spring, and eventually, the heavy heat of summer. I worked, I saved, I grew, and slowly, I began to look different, stronger. My face, once pale with exhaustion, carried a quiet fire. My shoulders, once hunched in defeat, straightened. My eyes, once downcast, began to hold steady when I met people's gaze. I was changing, and I knew it. But revenge isn't just about preparation. It's also about timing, and timing, I realized, would be everything. If I revealed the folder too soon, they'd bury it, spin it, twist it against me like they always had. I needed to wait until the moment when they were at their highest, when the fall would be the hardest, and that's when the invitation came. It was in early autumn. A glossy envelope, my name scrawled in my mother's careful handwriting. Inside was an invitation to a family celebration at my parents' house. Lila was being honored for some new business deal she had closed, something about expanding her boutique into a franchise. I stared at the card for a long time. My first instinct was to throw it away, to spare myself the pain of being the invisible guest at her golden table again. But then, my eyes flicked to the folder sitting on my desk, and I realized something. This was it. The perfect stage. The perfect audience. The perfect trap, because the higher she climbed, the colder the air became. And when I pulled the ground out from under her, everyone would watch her freeze. That night, I pulled out my notebook and wrote a single line: reveal at the party. And for the first time since that winter morning, I felt warmth spread through me that had nothing to do with blankets or heaters. It was the warmth of knowing the end of this story wasn't going to be me, broken and forgotten. It was going to be her. When the invitation arrived, I didn't RSVP right away. I let it sit on my desk, its glossy edges catching the light every time I passed. Some part of me wondered if it was a trick, if they only wanted me there as another background prop, another reminder of how much brighter Lila's light shone compared to mine. But the truth was, the decision had already been made the moment I opened that envelope. I was going, not as a victim this time, but as a reckoning. The weeks leading up to the celebration became my crucible. I tightened my routine work, save, plan, refine. I combed through the red folder again and again, rehearsing how I would reveal it, imagining the expressions on their faces when the truth spilled out across the room. Every night, I practiced in front of the mirror. Not the words, those would come when they needed to. No, what I practiced was something far more important. My composure. I lifted my chin. I steadied my eyes. I softened my voice so it carried weight without trembling. Because when the time came, I didn't just want them to hear me. I wanted them to feel me. To realize that the girl they once silenced had found her voice, and it was sharper than they ever imagined. But I also knew that walking into that house again would test me. The memories it held were heavy birthday dinners where my presence was smaller, quieter. Holiday mornings where my seat felt colder. Nights where laughter seemed to die when I entered the room. I couldn't let those ghosts choke me again. So I built armor. Not the kind you wear on your body, but the kind you forge in your soul. I told myself over and over, they cannot take anything from me anymore, because I've already taken it back. Money was still tight, but I saved enough to buy one thing I'd never allowed myself before. A dress that made me feel powerful. It wasn't extravagant, not compared to what Lila usually wore, but it was sharp deep navy with a clean line that hugged my shoulders and flowed to the floor. When I tried it on in the shop, I barely recognized myself. The girl staring back at me looked steady, unshakable, dangerous even. I remember smiling at my reflection, a small, private smile that said, yes, this is who they'll see. As the date drew closer, I thought about the folder constantly. I rehearsed how I'd carry it. Should I hold it openly, let it announce itself like a flag of war, or keep it tucked away until the right moment, a hidden blade that would slash through their performance when they least expected it? I chose the latter, because timing wasn't just important, it was everything. I wanted them to relax first, to believe they had me under control again, to bask in their illusion of power, until it shattered like glass in their hands. 2 nights before the party, I couldn't sleep. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling of my small rented room, listening to the hum of the city outside. My mind kept circling back to one question. Was I ready for this? Revenge isn't clean. It isn't simple. It doesn't just destroy the guilty, it changes the one who delivers it to. Would this make me free? Or would it consume me? I turned to the folder on my desk, glowing faintly in the moonlight, and I realized something important. I wasn't doing this to become like them. I was doing this to finally stop being their victim. There's a difference. And it was that difference that gave me peace. The morning of the celebration arrived colder than I expected for early autumn. The air carried a crisp bite, as though the world itself was holding its breath. I woke before dawn, washed my face in icy water, and dressed slowly, carefully, as though every movement was part of a ritual. The navy dress slid over my skin like a second self. I fastened the simple silver pendant at my neck, the only piece of jewelry my grandmother had given me personally before she passed. Then I picked up the red folder. It felt heavier than it ever had before. Not just paper, not just ink, this was years of silence condensed into a single weight. I slipped it into my bag, whispered to myself, "Today," and stepped outside. The closer I got to my parents' house, the more memories pressed against me. The street lined with maple trees. The stone driveway where I once scraped my knees as a child. The wide windows that always seemed brighter when Lila stood in them. I almost turned back. Almost. But then I thought of that winter morning, my sister's hand on my shoulder, pushing me into the cold, telling me I didn't belong, and my steps grew steady again. This time, I wasn't walking in as an outsider. I was walking in as the storm. When I arrived, the house was already glowing with lights. Cars lined the driveway. Laughter spilled from the open door, and I could hear Lila's voice above it all, rich with triumph. I paused at the gate, letting the sound wash over me, and for a moment I smiled, because they had no idea. Not yet. I walked in slowly, deliberately. The room was full: neighbors, extended family, business associates. Glasses clinked. The air was thick with perfume and expensive wine. And then I saw her, Lila, at the center of it all, dressed in glittering gold. Her smile stretched wide as she basked in the attention. My parents stood close by, their faces glowing with pride. For a second, I saw them as the world saw them. Radiant, successful, untouchable. But I knew the truth. And soon, everyone else would too. Lila's eyes caught mine across the room. For a flicker of a second, I saw her falter, her smile tightening, her gaze sharpening. But then she smoothed it over, gliding toward me with practiced grace. Well, she purred, loud enough for others to hear. "You actually came. I didn't think you'd have the courage." I met her gaze, steady and calm. I wouldn't miss it. Her smile froze just slightly, but she turned back to her audience before anyone else could notice. That was the first crack. Small, but enough, and I hadn't even opened the folder yet. The room seemed brighter than I remembered, not because of the chandeliers or the candles, but because of the way people orbited around my sister, their laughter rising and falling like tides against her golden glow. It was strange, standing there in that navy dress, watching it all. For years, I had been part of these gatherings, quiet, invisible, pressed against the edges like furniture. But now I wasn't a shadow. I was the storm they hadn't seen coming. I didn't reveal the folder right away. That would've been too easy, too blunt. Instead, I walked slowly through the room, greeting faces I hadn't seen in years. Some gave me polite smiles, others avoided my eyes entirely, as though my presence carried a discomfort they couldn't quite name. It was Lila, of course, who filled the silence with her voice. "Everyone, can you believe it? She actually showed up," she said, with a theatrical laugh, one hand delicately covering her mouth. the way she always did when she wanted to appear charming. The guests chuckled, unsure whether they should laugh or shift uncomfortably. Most chose laughter. I only smiled, a small, steady smile that didn't waver. Her words no longer cut. If anything, they fueled me, because every barb she threw only set the stage higher for what was coming. I found a spot near the long dining table, its surface polished to a mirror-like shine. Crystal glasses lined the edges, each one waiting to be filled, each one reflecting fragments of the golden lights above. I set my bag down on the chair beside me, my fingers brushing against the outline of the red folder within. It pulsed like a heartbeat. Not yet, I whispered to myself. Not yet. Timing. This would all come down to timing. My parents spotted me soon after. My mother was the first to approach. She looked almost the same as she had that winter morning, her hair pinned back perfectly, her eyes sharp behind glasses that seemed to soften her only for strangers, never for me. Well, she said, her tone carrying that familiar chill, I didn't expect to see you here. It's good you came. At least you can behave like family once in a while. Her words stuck not because of what she said, but because of the casualness with which she said it, as if cutting me down was as natural as breathing. But I breathed deeper. I didn't flinch. Family is important, I replied smoothly. She blinked, surprised at my calmness, then gave a stiff nod before retreating back toward my father, who had been watching from afar. He didn't approach me. Not yet. But I saw the calculation in his eyes, the way he measured me from across the room like one might measure an unpredictable storm cloud. He could feel it, even if he didn't know what it was. Dinner was announced not long after. Guests moved to take their seats, laughter and chatter rising again as plates were set before us. Lila was, of course, at the head of the table, flanked by my parents, her golden dress shimmering like a crown. I sat several places down, close enough to watch, far enough to not be seen as part of their inner circle, and for once, I was glad of that, because from here I could see everything. The way Lila preened with every compliment. The way my parents' smiles widened every time someone praised her. The way whispers moved through the guests' small, unspoken truths that lingered in the air but never surfaced. It was like watching a performance I was about to interrupt. Halfway through the meal, Layla raised her glass. Everyone, she said, her voice carrying above the crowd, I just want to thank you all for being here tonight. This is the life I dreamed of, and it's only just beginning. The table erupted in applause. Some raised glasses, others tapped the table in support. I watched her, my face calm. I didn't raise my glass. Her eyes flicked toward me, sharp as a blade, and for the first time that evening, her smile slipped, just slightly, and I knew then. She felt it. She didn't know what it was, but she felt it. The storm edging closer, I could have revealed the folder right then, made the applause die in their throats. But no, not yet. The night was still too warm, too bright. I wanted it to sting. I wanted the contrast, the rise before the fall. As I waited. After dinner, the crowd moved back into the living room, where music played and drinks flowed more freely. Layla basked in the center, her laughter like bells, while my parents entertained the wealthier guests with their polished charm. I moved toward the staircase, needing a breath of quiet. The upper floor was dimmer, quieter, the muffled laughter below rising faintly through the air. I walked down the hall, my fingers grazing the frames that lined the walls. Photos of my sister at graduations, birthdays, business events.me. I was in some of them, but always on the edge. Always blurred, as though even the camera refused to focus on me. I paused in front of one photo. Lila at 18, holding her diploma, my parents glowing beside her. I was there too, in the corner, holding flowers, smiling faintly. And suddenly, I remembered, that day, those flowers weren't mine. They had been given to me by a teacher, just a small recognition of my effort. But before I could even hold them properly, Lila had grabbed them from me for the photo. My parents laughed, told me not to make a fuss, and in the picture, there I was empty-handed. I closed my eyes, a wave of old anger rising through me, but then I smiled, because soon those pictures wouldn't matter. Not when I had something far more powerful than flowers. I had the truth. When I returned downstairs, the night had shifted. Guests were looser now, the air heavier with drink and laughter. My father was holding court in the corner, my mother flitting from group to group, like a hostess in her prime, and Lila. She stood on the small stage at the front of the room, microphone in hand, ready to give another speech. I knew then this was the moment, because the higher she raised herself, the harder the fall would be. I moved toward the front, my bag in hand, the folder passed inside, red against the dark fabric, ready to burn its truth into the room. And as I stepped closer, I caught sight of my sister's eyes. She saw me. And for the first time that night, she looked afraid. The room had quieted for her. Lila stood at the front, bathed in golden light, microphone in hand, ready to make the night all about her as it always was. Her voice filled the space, smooth and polished. I just want to say, she began, pausing for dramatic effect, that everything I am, everything I have, is because of my hard work. And of course she glanced at my parents, her smile sweet as honey because of the love and support of my amazing family. Applause broke out again. Glasses clinked, heads nodded, but the words hit me differently. Hard work, support, love. The hypocrisy burned hotter than the wine I hadn't touched. I rose from my seat, slowly, my hand slipping into my bag. My pulse was steady now, like I had rehearsed this moment 1,000 times in silence. The guests noticed me first, their applause faltering as they saw me approach. Lila's eyes darted toward me, and for the first time that night, her flawless composure cracked. "What are you doing?" she hissed softly into the mic, though it carried just enough for the room to hear. I didn't answer. Not yet. Instead, I reached into my bag and pulled out the folder. The red caught the light, glowing against the muted tones of the room like fire in snow. Gasps echoed. Whispers rose instantly, rippling across the crowd. "What's that?" someone murmured. "A folder," another whispered. "Why red?" I stepped onto the edge of the stage, the weight of every eye pressing down on me. "This," I said at last, my voice calm, almost too calm, "is the truth." The room froze. Lila tried to laugh, though her voice trembled. "Truth? What are you talking about? This is a party, not some courtroom." She tried to move past me, but I blocked her with a single step, holding the folder firmly in both hands. "You always loved an audience, didn't you?" I said, my eyes locked on hers. "So let's give them a show. But this time it won't be the story you wrote." I opened the folder. Papers rustled like wings breaking free, sharp and brittle in the silence. The first page trembled slightly in my fingers, but not from fear. From the weight of finally releasing what had lived inside me for so long. I lifted it high so everyone could see. "These are records," I began, my voice carrying records of how my inheritance, my rightful share, was signed away without my knowledge. How documents were forged, manipulated, to make it look like I agreed. How everything was funneled to my sister. The room gasped. My words sliced through the air, leaving nothing but the sound of paper rustling as I turned the page and hear bank statements. Proof of transfers made in my name with signatures that aren't mine. Signatures that somehow I glanced at my parents match my father's handwriting a little too perfectly. Whispers erupted. Heads turned sharply toward my parents. I didn't stop. Emails, I continued, pulling another sheet. Messages exchanged between my sister and my parents. Plans, discussions about how to keep me quiet, about how I was too weak to fight back, about how, if I resisted, I stopped, my throat tightening, but I forced the words out. They'd kick me out and let me learn the hard way that I was nothing without them. A murmur of shock rose like thunder across the room. Faces shifted. Sympathy, disbelief, horror, and in the center of it all, Lila's mask. Shattered completely. You don't know what you're talking about, she shouted, her voice sharp and shrill now. You're lying. You're just bitter. But the crowd wasn't looking at me like I was a liar. They were looking at her, at my parents, and the people who had stood in gold light all evening but now looked drenched in shadow. My father stood abruptly, his chair scraping harshly against the floor. That's enough, he barked. Put those away. You're humiliating yourself. No, I said firmly, my voice steady as steel. I'm revealing you. I held up another paper. This one heavier. Final. And this is the legal testimony. Signed, stamped, verified. The lawyer who helped you forge those documents came clean. His confession matches every record I've shown. He admitted everything. The silence was deafening. It wasn't just whispers now, it was eyes widening, jaws dropping, hands covering mouths. Every guest in that room had just witnessed the collapse of the Golden family illusion. Lila lunged toward me desperate, her hands reaching for the folder. You can't, but I stepped back, clutching it to my chest. You had your turn, Lila, I said, my voice low, but sharp enough to cut. Every birthday, every holiday, every chance to shine, you had it all. But tonight is mine. The weight of my words lingered in the room, thick and heavy. And no one clapped now. No one laughed. The music had died. The celebration had frozen mid-breath, and in that silence, the truth echoed louder than anything my sister could ever say. I lowered the folder slowly, my chest rising and falling. This, I said finally, isn't about revenge. This is about truth. And the truth is, while you all left me to freeze on a winter morning, I found the strength to rise. And now, you'll finally see me. The words hung in the air, suspended, undeniable, and for the first time in my life, the room was mine. The silence was suffocating, the kind of silence that weighs more than noise, pressing against your chest until every heartbeat feels like a drum. I stood there, folder clutched in my hands, breathing hard but steady. The truth was finally out, but what followed? I hadn't fully prepared for T first. It was just whispers. Little murmurs in the corners. She has proof. Those signatures looked real. Did you see her father's face? He couldn't even deny it. Like wildfire, the whispers grew. People leaned toward each other, eyes wide, lips moving quickly. Then the whispers turned into stares. Stares that didn't land on me, they landed on them, on my parents, on my sister. The Golden family, once the center of admiration, now stood naked in the light of their own betrayal. My mother was the first to react. Her hands trembled as she reached for her wine glass, her knuckles pale, her eyes darting between me and the guests. "She's confused," she said weakly, her voice cracking. "She's making things up." She always did have a flair for drama, but no one was nodding along. If anything, her words sounded like desperation clinging to thin air. Then my father's voice cut through, booming and angry. "You all shouldn't be listening to this nonsense," he barked, his face red, his jaw tight. "She's trying to humiliate us, to ruin this night." "She's always been jealous," I interrupted sharply, my voice slicing through his. I stepped closer, holding the folder tight. "Jealous of being kicked out on a freezing winter morning. Jealous of watching you funnel everything to her while you left me with nothing. Jealous of being erased from my own family." My words hit harder than I thought they would. The crowd gasped softly, some covering their mouths. I locked eyes with him. For the first time, he didn't look like a giant towering over me. He looked small, cornered, and then it started. A man from the crowd, one of my father's old business partners, stood up and pointed. "Is this true?" he demanded. "Did you really forge her inheritance?" My father opened his mouth, but the words caught in his throat. His silence was louder than any confession. Another voice rose, sharp and angry. "A woman, one of my mother's friends. I can't believe it. All these years, you made it sound like she was the problem, like she was the ungrateful one. I knew something was wrong," another guest muttered loudly. "I always wondered why she was never around, why she always looked like an outsider, while the rest of you flaunted everything." The dam had broken. The crowd no longer whispered, they accused. They confronted. They turned, and in that storm, my parents and Lila stood, stripped of their carefully polished image, unable to hide. Lila finally snapped. She grabbed the microphone again, her voice trembling with rage. "She's lying. She's always been a liar. She forged those papers herself. She probably paid someone to fake those statements. You all know me, I'd never do something like that." Her words came too fast, too high-pitched, too desperate, and the crowd, they heard it. They smelled the panic in her voice, the cracks in her perfect fard. A woman near the back shouted, "If that's true, then show us your proof." Lila froze. Her lips opened, then closed again, and the silence that followed was damning. I stepped forward again, my hands steady, my voice even. "You don't have to believe me," I said, looking around at every face in the room. "The court's already due. The lawyer's confession is filed. The documents are verified. I didn't come here tonight to convince you." I turned back to Lila, who was trembling now, her grip on the microphone slipping. "I came here so you could no longer pretend. So you could no longer wear the mask while I carried the scars." My words landed. I could see it dot in their eyes, in their silence, in the way their admiration for her had curdled into suspicion, then disgust. The family pedestal had crumbled. My mother tried one last time, her voice breaking. "She's our daughter. She wouldn't do this to us. Please, don't listen to her. Families fight. They misunderstand each other." But her plea sounded hollow. It wasn't unity anymore. It was denial, and everyone could see the difference. I lowered the folder gently to my side. My voice softened, but it carried through the room like a blade wrapped in silk. "You all see them now. Not the polished faces, not the perfect family they pretend to be. You see the people who chose one child and abandoned another. who stole, lied, and erased me because it was easier than loving me equally. I turned slowly, looking at each guest, and now you'll decide whether to still stand beside them or whether to walk away the same way they once made me walk away, shivering in the snow. The weight of my words settled, and then, one by one, people began to move. Chairs scraped back. Heels clicked against the floor. Glasses were set down, untouched. Guests began to leave. Not loudly, not dramatically, but quietly, firmly. Some shook their heads. Some avoided eye contact with my parents. Some gave me a small, almost imperceptible nod as they passed, like a silent acknowledgement. We see you now. The golden celebration had turned into a ghostly exodus. Lila stood frozen, her face pale, her hand gripping the microphone so tightly her knuckles were white. My father's chest heaved, his anger simmering, but even he couldn't shout against the emptiness of a room abandoning him. And my mother, she sank into her chair, her hand pressed to her forehead, tears welling in her eyes. The empire they had built crumbled in a single night, and I was the one standing tall in the rubble. The room felt empty, though the echoes of the night lingered. The golden light still glimmered, reflecting off the now untouched glasses and polished silverware, but the laughter and chatter that had filled the house was gone. It had been replaced by a quiet that pressed against my ears, a hollow reverberation that carried the weight of every accusation, every gasp, every shocked whisper. I sank into a chair near the long dining table, still holding the red folder loosely in my lap. My hands weren't trembling anymore. They were steady, almost calm. I had done it. I had finally spoken the truth, and yet a strange emptiness filled me. For years, I had carried anger like armor, and the folder had been my shield. But now, with the truth revealed and the room cleared, I felt the first real taste of vulnerability. The quiet was deafening, and for the first time in a long time, I wondered, was it really over? The door creaked, and I looked up. It was an older woman, someone I didn't know well, a neighbor, perhaps, or a friend of my parents, who had lingered until the very end. Her hands were folded in front of her, and her eyes, unlike the others, were soft, not judgmental. You did the right thing, she said quietly. I blinked, surprised. You, she hesitated, swallowing. You didn't just reveal lies. You revealed truth. And sometimes that's more important than anything else. Her words hit me differently than I expected. For years, I had believed that my power came from exposing them, from making them shiver under the weight of their own deception. But she reminded me that power wasn't only in revenge. It was in truth, and in that moment, I felt the first flicker of relief. Light, warm, and almost unfamiliar, spread through me. I looked back at the folder, still open on the table. Pages I had touched 1,000 times, read 1,000 times, now lay in disarray, not neatly organized as I had kept them during my preparation. And yet, they didn't need to be. They had done their work. The proof, the documentation, the evidence, it had spoken louder than any speech I could have delivered. And more importantly, it had spoken for me. I leaned back in the chair, taking a deep breath. The adrenaline that had carried me through the confrontation was finally ebbing, leaving behind a strange calm, almost serene. It was over, and yet, life doesn't pause just because you've won. I knew the next steps wouldn't be easy. My family was fractured beyond repair. Some guests would whisper about me for months. My parents, bitter and humiliated, would retreat into their world of denial and anger. And Lila would never forgive me. But I had already made peace with that, because for the first time in my life, I had done something for myself. I packed the folder carefully back into my bag, standing slowly. Every step toward the door felt lighter than the last, and just as I reached the entrance, a hand touched my shoulder. I turned to see the older woman again. She smiled softly, her eyes glistening with quiet admiration. "You're strong," she said. "Don't ever forget that. And don't let them convince you that this isn't the life you deserve." Something in her voice resonated deep inside me, a sense of hope I hadn't felt in years. I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. "Thank you," I whispered. Outside, the night was cold, but it didn't bite. The streets were quiet, the city lights reflecting off the wet pavement from a recent rain. I paused, looking up at the sky. Stars glittered faintly above, distant and cold, yet impossibly constant, and I realized something. The winter morning when I was kicked out had been brutal. The cold had stuck. The snow had blinded me. But that morning had also taught me resilience. It had pushed me to survive, to fight, to find my voice. And now, standing alone under the vast sky, I understood something else. I wasn't the girl shivering on the doorstep anymore. I was the woman who had risen, who had reclaimed her life, who had taken the truth and made it her own. The red folder had frozen them that night. It had shattered the illusions, exposed the lies, and forced everyone to confront what they had hidden. But in the quiet aftermath, it also gave me something more precious than revenge: freedom. For the first time, I could breathe without fear, walk without caution, speak without restraint. The past was behind me. The future was mine. And as I walked into the night, the folder safely tucked away in my bag, I smiled. Because I knew one thing for certain: no winter could ever freeze me again. And no one, no sister, no parents, no family could ever erase me again. The days after the party were strange. No one called. No one reached out, not my parents, not Lila, not even the guests who had witnessed the chaos. And in some ways, that was the point. For the first time in my life, I was untethered from them, untangled from the web of manipulation and cruelty they had spun around me. It was liberating. I rented a small apartment in a part of the city I had never considered before. The place was modest: bare walls, a creaky floorboard or two, and a single window that framed the skyline in a way that felt like a painting I could step into. It wasn't much, but it was mine, and that mattered more than anything. I unpacked the red folder, placing it on a shelf where it could breathe, where it could exist without the tension of confrontation. It was no longer a weapon. It was a testament, a record of strength, and a reminder that I had survived. Work became my anchor. I picked up freelance projects: writing, research, consulting, anything that allowed me to focus on building my own future rather than reliving the past. Every paycheck was a brick in the foundation of the life I was constructing for myself. But the most important work wasn't financial. It was emotional. I allowed myself to feel again. Real feelings, not the filtered, cautious emotions I had lived behind for years. Anger, yes, but also joy, relief, pride, and slowly, even love for myself, for the life I was choosing, for the woman I was becoming. I started reconnecting with friends I had drifted away from, people who had seen through the family facades and understood the quiet suffering I had endured. Evenings became filled with laughter, stories, and warmth. I realized how long it had been since I felt truly supported, truly seen, And in those moments, I understood a truth I had never fully grasped before. Revenge could break the chains, but love, real, genuine love, built something far stronger. One evening, as I walked home from a late project, I passed a small bookstore tucked between two larger buildings. The window display caught my eye. A single, red-bound notebook with gold lettering. I paused. It reminded me of the red folder, the weapon that had freed me. But this wasn't about revenge anymore. I stepped inside, feeling the bell above the door jingle softly. The warmth of the shop enveloped me, and for the first time in years, I felt at peace with stepping into something new. I bought the notebook. It was blank, and I smiled, because I knew exactly what I would do with it. I started writing, not about the past, not about my family, not about revenge. I wrote about possibilities, about dreams I had shelved while surviving, while hiding, while fighting to be heard. I wrote about travels I wanted to take, careers I wanted to explore, people I wanted to meet, and every time the pen touched the page, I felt lighter. The past would always be there, but it no longer dictated the rhythm of my life. Weeks passed, months even. The winter that had once been cruel became a distant memory. The woman who had shivered on that doorstep was gone. In her place stood someone steady, someone fierce, someone free. I still carried the red folder with me, sometimes not to open, but to glance at, a reminder of how far I had come, and each time I did, I felt a quiet smile spread across my face. I had taken back my power, my voice, my life, and no one could take that away from me. Yet, in the back of my mind, a thought lingered. Lila, she had lost more than pride that night. She had lost the narrative she had controlled for so long. And I knew eventually she would try to rebuild, to regain control. But I wasn't afraid anymore. If she ever came back into my life, she would find me different, stronger, unshakable, untouchable. I was no longer the girl she could push around. I was the woman who had turned winter into fire, and that was power she could never steal. The notebook sat on my desk, a symbol of beginnings, not endings, and I knew, deep in my heart, that my story was mine alone to write, not my sister's, not my parents', mine. And finally, for the first time in as long as I could remember, that felt perfect. It had been a quiet few months, the kind of quiet that lets you breathe, lets you rebuild, lets you finally exist without the constant weight of fear or betrayal. I had my apartment, my work, my friends, my routines. The red folder rested on a shelf, a silent testament to my victory, but no longer a weapon in use. I was finally living, or so I thought. It came on a Tuesday morning. My phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. "We need to talk." I froze. The L had only one possible meaning. Lila, the same sister who had kicked me into the snow. The same sister whose lies had stolen years from me. The same sister who had been humiliated in front of everyone the night of the party. And now, she was reaching out. I stared at the message for a long time. Do I respond? Do I ignore it? Years ago, the choice would have been easy. I would have replied, bowed to her manipulation, or feared what she might do next. Now, it wasn't, because I wasn't afraid anymore. I typed a single word in response. Why? Her reply came almost immediately. Because you think this is over. But it's not. We need to settle this once and for all. I felt a flicker of something I hadn't expected. Curiosity. Not fear. Not anger. Not panic. Curiosity. Because if she truly thought she could unsettle me, She hadn't realized one crucial thing. I had grown beyond her games. I typed back, "I'm listening, but don't waste my time." The silence that followed was almost unbearable. Until her next message, "Meet me tonight, p.m. The old CAF on Willow Street. Come alone." I stared at the screen, weighing my options. This could be a trap. It could be another attempt at manipulation. Or it could be something else entirely, an admission, a plea, or a final showdown. And I knew one thing. I was ready. By evening, I dressed simply but confidently. Black boots, fitted jeans, a leather jacket that hugged my shoulders just right. Nothing extravagant, nothing flashy. Just me, prepared, steady, unafraid. I left my apartment and walked to Willow Street. The old CAF was tucked between a bookstore and a florist, small and quiet, with a few warm lights glowing from the windows. When I entered, she was already there, Lila, sitting at a corner table, her golden hair pulled back, her eyes sharp, but not the triumphant sparkle I remembered. There was something different in her gaze: vulnerability, frustration, and a hint of fear. She looked up, forcing a smile. "Thanks for coming," she said, her voice low. I pulled out the chair across from her and sat, keeping my posture straight, my hands folded neatly on the table. "You wanted to meet," I said. "I'm here. Say what you need to say, and then leave." She hesitated. Her fingers traced the rim of her coffee cup, twisting slightly. She started, then paused, biting her lip. "I didn't think, after everything, you'd actually survive it all. You were stronger than I imagined." I raised an eyebrow. "Is this an apology?" I asked. She shook her head. "No, not exactly. I came because there's something you don't know. Something about that night, the party, the folder." My pulse quickened. Not out of fear, but anticipation. She leaned in, her voice barely above a whisper. "There's more. I didn't act alone. Someone else, someone powerful, was behind the schemes. Someone who didn't want you to have what was yours. And now they know you've exposed everything. They're watching." The words hit me like a cold wind. I had thought the battle was over. I had thought the storm had passed, but it hadn't. Someone else. Someone hidden. Someone who had been orchestrating in the shadows, and now I had to prepare again. I leaned back, keeping my composure, though inside a familiar fire began to burn. "So," I said slowly, "you came to warn me, or to drag me back into the chaos?" Her eyes met mine, pleading, almost desperate. "Both," she admitted. "But this time, you can't do it alone. They're smarter, stronger. And if you confront them alone, it could ruin everything you've built." I paused, and in that pause, I realized something important. I wasn't alone. I had my strength, my friends, my knowledge, and most importantly, my resilience. I didn't need her help, but I could use the information. "Tell me everything," I said finally. "From the beginning. Every secret. Every person involved." And as she began to speak, detailing a network of deceit I had never imagined, I felt a strange thrill. The storm wasn't over. But this time, I was ready. The CF smelled of coffee and old wood, but the aroma didn't comfort me. I listened. As Lila spoke, her words spilling out in a hurried, almost frantic rhythm. She revealed names, dates, accounts, and methods, a network of manipulation so intricate that even my parents seemed like pawns. As the puzzle formed in my mind, I realized one thing clearly. The battle I thought was over had only just begun, and this time, there would be no mistakes. We left the CAF, stepping into the crisp night air. I glanced at her, keeping my expression neutral. Let me get this straight, I said slowly. Someone orchestrated the folder, the forged documents, the theft of my inheritance. And it wasn't just my family. She nodded, biting her lip. Exactly. They've been watching, pulling strings. My parents were convenient tools, but the real mastermind. They're powerful, and they won't forgive exposure easily. I took a deep breath, feeling a familiar fire rise in my chest. I wasn't afraid anymore. Not then. Not ever again. Then we plan, I said. We gather evidence, map the connections, and we hit back strategically. This isn't about revenge anymore. It's about taking control. Back at my apartment, I spread everything out on the desk. The red folder, Lila's documents, notes from my own investigations, emails, photographs, financial records, each piece of evidence a thread. And now, I needed to weave them together into a net. For the first time, I saw a bigger picture. This wasn't just about my family. This was about reclaiming my life from anyone who thought they could manipulate me, silence me, or erase me, and I would not fail. Lila hovered nervously at the edge of the room. I didn't mean to get you involved, she whispered. I looked at her. Calm, steady. You did involve me, I said. But you also gave me a choice. And I choose to fight. Not for you. Not for them. For me. Her face fell. Relief mixed with guilt. Good, I said. Because this isn't just about survival anymore. This is about taking them down before they can touch anyone else. The strategy began immediately. First, identify the players. Who had the means? Who had the motive? Who had been quietly orchestrating the chaos? Lila provided the names she knew, and I cross-referenced them with financial records, emails, and past interactions. Second, gather proof. This meant digging deeper, risking exposure, but I knew how to stay invisible. Years of navigating my family's deceit had taught me subtlety, patience, and timing. Third, build alliances. I reached out to friends I trusted, people outside my family, outside their circle of influence, experts who could verify documents, trace financial transactions, and confirm the evidence I already had. Every step felt like reclaiming pieces of myself, and with each piece, the storm began to crystallize. Weeks passed in a blur of investigation. Lila remained close, nervous but cooperative. I didn't trust her fully, but I didn't need to. She had knowledge, and that was enough. Meanwhile, I grew stronger, not physically, but mentally. Strategically, every document I analyzed, every connection I traced, reinforced my sense of power. The red folder, once a weapon against my family, now sat beside me as a symbol of everything I had survived and everything I was capable of. One night, as I traced a series of suspicious transactions, a realization hit me like lightning. The mastermind hadn't just orchestrated my family's betrayal. They had left a trail in arrogance, a flaw, something they thought I wouldn't notice. But I did. And now they were vulnerable. I leaned back in my chair, a small, almost predatory smile curling at the corner of my lips. This was no longer a fight for survival. This was a chess match, and I was 3 moves ahead. The final step was coming. I could feel it, the confrontation that would end everything, the reckoning, the closure, the ultimate liberation was approaching. And when it came, I would not falter, because for the first time in my life, I wasn't the girl pushed into the snow. I was the storm, and storms don't ask permission. They arrive and everything bends beneath them. The night was quiet, almost too quiet. I had traced every thread, confirmed every transaction, and mapped every connection. The hidden mastermind, the person who had orchestrated my family's betrayal, who had manipulated Lila, my parents, and nearly destroyed me, was finally exposed, and tonight they would face me. The meeting place was deliberate. A small, private office in a neutral building. I arrived early, carrying the red folder and a secondary briefcase filled with evidence I had gathered over weeks. Lila had insisted on coming, but I had told her to stay behind. This was my battle, my confrontation, my closure. I wasn't afraid. Not anymore. I stepped inside, and there they were, sitting behind a large desk, calm, composed, almost smug. The mastermind had underestimated me. They always did. "Welcome," they said, voice smooth as silk. "I've been expecting you." I didn't respond. I placed the folder on the desk, letting its presence speak louder than any words. "You think you've uncovered everything," they said, leaning back, "but do you really understand what you're dealing with?" I opened the folder slowly, letting the papers fall into place. Bank statements, emails, confessions, verifications, everything meticulously documented. "Do you recognize this?" I asked, my voice calm but piercing. Their eyes flickered over the documents, then widened. You've connected it all," they said, their confidence cracking for the first time. "I did," I said. "And now everyone will see what you've done." They laughed, a sharp, bitter sound. "And who will believe you? Your sister? Your parents? Everyone knows how easily you can be dismissed. You've been invisible your whole life." I smiled, a cold, controlled smile. "Invisible," I said. "Not anymore. The night of the party was just the beginning. I've documented everything, the forgeries, the manipulations, the networks, every email, every transfer, every lie. And I've verified it all. The courts, experts, witnesses, they all confirm it." I slid the evidence across the desk. Their hands shook slightly as they scanned the pages. Their composure, carefully maintained for years, was crumbling. "You can't do this," they whispered, almost pleading. "Now, I already have," I said. "And this time it's final. No one will manipulate me again. No one will erase me again. You underestimated the girl you pushed into the snow. You underestimated the woman she became." The tension was suffocating. The room seemed to shrink around us. "You think you've won," they spat. "But life isn't over after one victory." I leaned forward, my eyes sharp, unwavering. "This isn't just one victory. This is closure and justice. For me, for everyone you've used, for everyone you've hurt. Your time is over." I pressed a button on the briefcase, and a screen flickered to life, showing copies of every document, every message, every proof I had collected. "You wanted power," I said, voice steady, "and you thought it would last forever. But here it is, your empire of lies laid bare." I watched as their face paled. Every strategy they had relied upon crumbling in real time. You can't," they stammered. "Yes," I said, "I can." And I did. It was over. Not with violence, not with threats, but with truth. The same truth that had frozen my sister and parents months ago. The same truth that had given me my freedom. Now completed its course. The mastermind had no defense, no allies, no leverage. Only the undeniable evidence of their manipulation. And for the first time in my life, I felt complete. I left the office that night lighter than I had ever felt. The red folder remained with me, but it no longer had the weight of anger. It was a symbol, a reminder that even in the coldest winter, even in the darkest manipulation, I had the strength to rise, to fight, and to claim my life. Outside, the city lights reflected on wet streets. I breathed deeply, feeling the night wrap around me like a cloak of protection. I wasn't just a survivor, I was a victor. Weeks later, I returned to my apartment, the notebook open on my desk, blank and ready. I began writing not about revenge, not about betrayal, but about life. About freedom. About possibilities. About the woman I had become. And as I wrote, I realized something powerful. The past had shaped me, but it no longer controlled me. The storms I had survived had forged me. And from now on, I would write my story, not anyone else's. The red folder sat quietly on the shelf beside me, a reminder of what I had endured, what I had fought for, and what I had claimed. And in that silence I smiled, because finally, truly, I was free. Thanks for watching. Hoped you liked it. If you watched till the end, please comment revenge, so that we could understand you were with us till the end. As well as, please let us know, where are you watching from? What do you want to hear from us in next video? If you have any incident in your life, please let us know. We would love to share your story. Before leaving, please hit the subscribe button, comment your thought, and share with your nearest and dearest one. See you in the next one. Until to the next one, stay happy.